My therapist suggested that I write down my story because she felt I was holding too much anger inside and not expressing it in any way that would allow me to get over the betrayal. Since I don't admit my guilt, I'm still searching for answers that I can't get. As a result, my life is treading water, waiting for me to move on. She believes that if I can look at what happened in a different way, express my feelings about it, I will open a path to reclaiming my true self. Whoever he is? I don't know him. She says that's my problem. My name is Robert Benson. As of this writing, I am 34 years old. I was a middle manager at an engineering firm designing and building machines for clients. I knew that I would probably not be able to advance any further as it was a family firm, and I was not a family member. The events I will recount mean that my position in the firm became untenable. I have been told I am one of the good guys. I have a good sense of humor, or at least I used to. I work hard, provide well, and take care of other people. I help out when needed and take my responsibilities, such as marriage, seriously. It seems like I was the only one. Let me explain. All through high school, I performed at a slightly above average level. I wasn't a genius, but through hard work I did well on my exams. I had a few fights when I was pushed too hard, but when they were over, the feuds went away. I have some very close male friends who have always been there for me and supported me. I wasn't an Adonis, so women didn't throw themselves at me, but those I encountered liked me. I was raised to treat others well, especially women. I took no for an answer. I dropped out of high school and started working for the company as a day release apprentice at a community college, studying engineering. I always enjoyed building things. First Duplo, Lego, then Meccano. Now it's computer-designed machines. My friends say I like my toys because I'm always looking at new gadgets. I wore one built-in camera that looked like a badge. It was meant to capture what I thought was a great evening that I would want to reminisce about later. When things went south, I'm glad I did it, as it turned out to be more than useful afterward. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At the end of my freshman year of college, there was a big party where we celebrated being free for a couple months. My friend Bill really liked a girl in the nursing group who used some of the college services as well as the local hospital. He talked me into attending the party to get her girlfriends interested. As if nursing students would look up to me, an engineer, and not doctors. I seem to be normal, height, looks. I'm muscular and fit because of my job. I went because there was live music. Bill's friend Stephanie introduced us to the other girls. I was nice, complimenting them all. This was true, as they were all beautiful. I was surprised when one of them, Carol, started talking to me. We had a drink, danced, and her legs survived. I'm not the most coordinated dancer. She seemed to enjoy my company and even laughed at my inappropriate jokes. Carol was pretty, about 5 feet 5 inches tall, slender build. I was surprised when, at the end of the evening, she asked to meet me again. I agreed. I'm not a fool. Well, what happened showed I was a fool, but then. We began courting, and soon I was feeling emotions I had only felt once before. I had girls I really liked, but Carol took my breath away whenever I saw her. I missed her when we weren't together. My parents laughed at me, but not cruelly. They saw how she made me happy. I even studied harder to show her that in the future, I could be someone she would respect, love maybe. We often discussed our future. She wanted to become a registered nurse and thought she couldn't have children to do that. I told her that I loved children and that having them would not hinder her career and would even help, as she would have more experience to share to help her skills. We spent forever on this, but it was a sure thing for her. I talked to my parents who advised me to go with my heart's calling. My mom loved Carol like the daughter she never had. My brother Dan had one child and another on the way, so they had grandchildren. Carol was close to her sister Carrie, and when she finished her night shifts, she had 5 to 7 days off. 2 or 3 times a year, she would go to Carrie's house. It was 2 hours away. She used to say I was working so hard I wouldn't miss her. That wasn't true, I did miss her. I gave in to her ultimatum of no family, and we were married almost 3 years after we met, on June 16, 2009. Bill was my best man, and Stephanie was my chief bridesmaid. They were no longer a couple as Stephanie wanted to marry a doctor. Bill liked to tease her about leaving him when they were dating. I would have agreed with him. Carol looked gorgeous walking down the aisle in an ivory satin dress. She smiled at me all the way down the aisle. I did my best to maintain eye contact. Our guests must have thought I was being silly, as a smirk was painted on my face. Carol finally moved into my house. She refused until we were married. I bought it cheap from my grandparents when I started earning enough for a mortgage. It needed a lot of work, but I'm handy with my hands. By the time we got married, I had mostly completed the major work. There were still a few things that needed updating. There was another fight over our marriage, our bank account. Carol wanted to keep her own account so she wouldn't have to depend on me to spend on whatever she wanted. I was to keep mine, and we would open a joint account and put money in there in proportion to what we earned for bills, vacations, and so on. I lost that discussion as well. Things were fine, if not great, for the first few years. The nursing class had reunions, and I was able to attend most of them. I missed a couple of them because I was on a business trip. Honestly, I felt like a spare tire. I was tolerated, treated almost like a buffoon. Stephanie was always there for me, as she is Carol's best friend. Carol tried to spend most of her time with me, but she danced with a few doctors, but I didn't see anything wrong with those dances. I became friends with several husbands as we shared a common interest in golf. I managed to get my handicap down to 6 and was persuaded to compete with them. Sometimes we traveled for golf breaks. Some of them were during reunions or when Carol would tee off in the evenings. She still went to her sister's house, which annoyed me. Carol rarely talked about her work or her ambitions. She seemed happy being an ordinary nurse. If I asked, she said she didn't want the responsibility and lack of interaction with patients if she was promoted. Carol and I planned our social life mostly around her friends. I still went out with Bill and others, but it was mostly at a local club for drinks. Carol sometimes came to the parties. She was always happy to hang out with us non-medical staff if shifts allowed. With her, it was usually food, dancing, and cabs. The two of us would spend time walking in the hills, going to Glasgow or Edinburgh for weekends and plays. We vacationed where there were beautiful beaches and interesting places nearby. Carol's bikinis were, of course, conservative. I offered her more revealing ones but was rebuffed. She never considered going to a beach where no clothes were allowed. We rarely argued. If one of us didn't want something or the other objected, we discussed it. In some cases I won, in some cases she won. It never interfered with our personal lives. Here she could be very loud, dress outrageously, or role play. There was nothing taboo to try. Some we liked, others not so much. Every day I loved her more and more. Our 10th anniversary was approaching, and I wanted to do something special. I talked to Stephanie about booking a hotel, going out to dinner, and going dancing. She was agreeable. She swore she would keep it a secret that she knew about it. The other couple said the same thing. I knew I had to tell her about it, but closer to the event or she would want to add more. When I told Carol a few days before, she was thrilled. I just managed to get out of bed in the morning. She called Stephanie, and the next thing I knew, I was on my way with the 4 of us. Arriving at the hotel, we dropped our things for the night. We went downstairs to meet the others. The conversation between the girls seemed very emotional. Stephanie was all engrossed in Carol, who was fully involved in all of Stephanie's plans. Brian and I were discussing an upcoming golf competition we were planning to enter. We needed to defend it. Mark and Grant were playing for fun, saying that their job, doctors, is stressful enough as it is, unless you add competition to it. We moved on to the nightclub in the hotel. We found a table in the back near the bar and main lobby, mostly away from the main loudspeakers. We were able to talk, relax between dances, and enjoy the evening. Carol made sure everyone knew she was dancing with just me. We spent most of the next 90 minutes on the dance floor. We stopped for drinks, I for water, she for wine, and so on several times. We were dancing when some man patted me on the shoulder, and when I turned around, Carol had melted into his arms. I didn't even have time to say, "Get off." I was shocked. She was so happy. I had never seen the way she looked at him before. He was in control as they danced. I walked back to our table in shock. Stephanie spoke up and her delight was evident. "Robert, it's so good that you let Carol dance with your first love. She invited him to your wedding so he could claim her, but he never showed up." I looked at her. She was smiling, but her look showed utter contempt for me. That wasn't all there was to it. I was furious. I exploded. "What the hell is going on?" The others lowered their eyes. No one but Stephanie could look at me. I shouted, "This has ruined my whole evening. She only danced with me tonight. You screwed me over, Stephanie. You told her to have time to set it up. You both knew about that bastard. What the hell else did she have planned?" The others couldn't believe my anger. I was still staring at Stephanie, waiting for an answer, when Carol came over and tugged on my arm. She had obviously heard me. Many around me heard me and looked in our direction. She had a serious look on her face. I knew I wasn't going to like what she was going to say. She pulled me into the lobby of the hotel. To say that my evening had gone from bad to bloody disastrous would be putting it mildly. Carol spoke firmly. "Robert, the man I danced with is Bruce Benning. He is my first and only love." I gasped. Carol continued. "He and I dated before I met you. We met several times a year. He was studying to be a pediatric neurosurgeon, so we couldn't be together. He was happy when I found you. You're such a good person. An honest, decent man. I loved spending time with you, but I always loved Bruce. He's the reason I couldn't have your children. You would have been very hurt when I left you and took them with me. Bruce is now head of the neurosurgery department at the hospital in Leeds. I'm traveling with him. I'm sorry you're in so much pain, but while we were together, I gave myself to you without abandon so that you would never know I loved another. If Bruce hadn't come back for me, I would have been happy to be your wife forever." I breathed deeply. My vision was blurred. My head was splitting. My heart was racing. I was looking at someone who I thought loved me. I involuntarily threw up. So much for a lovely dinner. I saw Stephanie smiling and the others watching her. That bastard Benning was walking toward us. I looked at Carol and screamed, "You goddamn evil, lying, deceitful bitch whore! Give me your wedding and engagement rings or I'll rip your finger off and take them away." The others were shocked by my outburst. It was so uncharacteristic, but the events unfolding in front of me were also awesome. Benning stepped forward. I turned to him. "Stay the hell away, or you'll never be able to use your hands again, asshole." He stopped, surprised by my threat, and looked at the others as if looking for support. "You entertain my wife, demand that she humiliate me, and these so-called friends are bloody happy for both of you." I turned my anger on the others. "You're all low-life sewer dwellers for crying out loud. How many of you are having fun with others? How many marriages do you want to see explode before your eyes for your damn fun? The whores have more integrity than any of you." I turned to Carol again, my anger crystal clear. I screamed, "Bitch with rings!" My temporal arteries were clearly visible. I stared at her in rage. I had never felt such anger. I wanted to wring her neck until she broke. I could see the fear on her face when she saw the stranger. She realized she was in danger. She took off her rings. She cried, but to hell with her. I grabbed them and stormed into our room. I gathered my bag and looked around and saw the clothes. Without a second thought, I threw it in the trash and emptied my bladder on it. I held out my key card to the receptionist who saw our exchange and told her, "The whore will pay the bill." Looking back, I'm embarrassed that I never apologized for throwing up on the lobby floor. At least it wasn't the carpet. I doubt I'll go back. I drove home. My thoughts were all over the place. I don't remember how I got there. Once in my house, I calmed down. I don't know how. I couldn't calm down, but I felt the need to act. I went to the garage and disabled the automatic door since it might have a key fob. I grabbed a box of trash bags and headed to our bedroom. I pulled her things out of the closets and put them in a pile. I pulled out the drawers and dumped their contents into the bags. There were 2 keys taped to the underside of one drawer. One for the vault, the other for the safety deposit box. I rummaged through her jewelry box, pulled out all the jewelry I'd given my wife, and tossed the box into the bags. I went through our file cabinet and shook out all of her papers. I came across her password book and scanned it. There was nothing about her or Benning in the cabinet. It was almost 2 in the morning. There was no way my brain could calm down. My heart was still pounding, but not as hard as before. The warehouse. I looked online to find out which one, because there were 3 in the city, all with 24-hour access. I found the one I needed, as they obligingly showed the key on the home page. I took latex gloves so my fingerprints wouldn't be detected. What I discovered caused me deep pain. I thought I now knew I was in pain, but it wasn't. It ripped my soul out of me and tore it into many pieces. I went back to my car and took the camera I have at work to take pictures of the entire contents. I wrote everything down, and I mean everything. There were boxes of files and 2 locked cabinets. I picked them out. One of those skills that is useful for an engineer to have. I almost wished I hadn't. In one of them, I discovered Carol's plans. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Who the hell was she? In another cabinet were Benning's files. They confirmed my impression that he was a thoroughly depraved, heartless bastard, a narcissist. The only person he loved was himself. I had to go back to the car and get the battery for my phone as my camera was out of battery. I checked to make sure I had taken all the pictures, so it was already 7 in the morning when I was done. I locked the closet so they wouldn't know I was there. I went into the cafe and had breakfast. I went over in my mind all the things I had found. Carol's parents insisted on a prenup to protect their daughter. From what I'd discovered, Carol wasn't about to agree to a prenup and take her 10%. No doubt, under the guidance of that asshole Benning, she wanted to not only take me out, but destroy me for good. Although I wanted to confront her, I realized I couldn't let her know I knew what her plans were. The Kursal Flyers song came to mind. When I got home, I replaced my keys so she wouldn't guess that I knew about them and their contents. I stopped by the hardware store and bought new locks for my house. Carol didn't have the keys in her purse, but I wasn't going to take any chances. My next stop was at the bank, where I checked out a strange safe deposit box I knew nothing about. It contained several bonds in her name only. I photographed them again. Curiouser and curiouser. Where had she gotten the money for them? Was she an escort on the side? Who the hell was she? No sooner had I gotten home than I got a text from Carol saying she wanted to stop by to pick up her car. I replied, "Your car, the car in question is leased in my name, and I'm making the payment since your salary is so meager. I'm going to take a vacation and use it until the lease runs out in 8 weeks. Your clothes and belongings are already in garbage bags. I'll put them in the fireplace and burn them if you don't need them. I'm going for straw to stuff your wedding dress so I can think it's you burning it." The door locks and alarm code were changed. "Don't bring that bastard in! He won't like what I'll do to him!" A few minutes later, her sister called, shouting insults at me. I terminated the call and blocked her number. I didn't actually intend to burn her wedding dress, but the reaction confirmed how she felt about it. A picture of her wearing it to marry Benning popped into my head. Screw it, I took it to the fireplace and set it on fire. It had been beautiful, just like my marriage, but now both were reduced to ashes. An hour later, Carol showed up with Stephanie and Brian. Brian said quietly, "Robert, how are you?" I laughed, like Caesar after his friend stabbed him in the back. I looked at them all and yelled, "What the hell do you think? I'm mad as hell, pissed at all of you for covering for her without having the decency to tell me what you obviously knew. And most of all, I'm pissed at myself for falling for that damn whore." Carol was annoyed when I called her a slut. She seemed to think I should act normal to her. "Robert, I know you're hurting, but this is so unlike you. You ruined the clothes I was going to wear for Bruce. There was no need for that. I'll get my things. When I do, I'll leave you alone. I know I've hurt you, but I've always loved only Bruce. You'll be happier with someone who will love you and bear you children. You are a very special person, and I really enjoyed our time together. If I had never met Bruce, I would have been so happy with you. Can I have my wedding ring back? It will be a beautiful reminder of all the good things we've done together. I just screamed, "Hell no way! It's been passed down in my family for generations. Mom loved that it fit you so well. We were made for each other. I have yet to tell them what a conniving slut you are." Carol flinched at the fury of my words. Brian and Stephanie helped her load her bags into the car. Carol asked about the wedding dress. I advised her to check the fire pit. When she saw the ashes, she cried. Stephanie called me a bastard. I corrected her. You've had her back all these years. She won't be able to wear it if she marries that damn asshole. It's the ashes of my marriage, my life. Who the hell do you think you are, bitch? Brian, though shocked by my outburst, didn't defend her. He was the only one who looked embarrassed about last night. When Carol came to her senses, she asked if she could check to see if I had missed anything. I said yes. While she was doing that, I told Brian that we wouldn't be defending any more titles. He nodded. A few minutes later, Carol came downstairs. She said softly, "Robert, I'm sorry, but I've always loved Bruce. When you divorce me, you'll find someone who will love you the way you give love. You'll have the family you want so badly. This hurts both of us. I really care about you, and I'm sorry I hurt you, but it's for the best." They left, and I went into the house. As I expected, she needed the 2 hidden keys. I was so tired I went to bed. I fell asleep with my head barely touching the pillow. I was awakened by my mother's call. Before I could say a word, she started, "Robert, I never thought you would raise your hand against a woman, but Carol showed us pictures of her wounds. She explained why she left you." "Why?" I was angry and didn't hold back. "Mom, you've been lied to, just like I've been lied to for the last 13 years. She's been having fun with that bastard the whole time she's been with me. She's setting me up to keep everything rather than lose it. I don't know who the hell she's become. And did I ever even know her? I've never raised my hand to any woman. You and my father taught me that. Have you ever heard anyone suggest that I've ever raised my hand to a woman? Even last night, when I wanted so badly to wring her neck, I didn't. You can believe her or you can believe me, but the truth will come out. If you take her side, you'll lose me forever." I ended the conversation. The battle lines were formed and the war had begun. I went to get dinner and returned to the house. I had the information, now I needed to get organized. As they say in crime shows, follow the money. So I did just that. First, I checked our joint account. What I discovered was interesting, very interesting. I was glad I had copied Carol's password book as it proved invaluable. In the evening and on Sunday, I spent the rest of the evening and Sunday trying to make sense of everything. Along the way, I changed all my passwords. I discovered that I had been played a hell of a trick. Every time she came to visit her sister, I left for a competition or vacationed with my so-called friends. She was a goddamn asshole. I was so angry, mostly at myself for being so damn stupid. Why didn't I see what was going on? Didn't see her visits for what they were? Why didn't I even suspect a single incident? What was wrong with me? How could she do this to me? Monday morning, I arrived at the office early. I wanted to check my annual leave and credit hours. Sandra from Human Resources always came in early. She saw that I was out of sorts. We dated in high school and became very close. She ended the relationship. She is still single. I rarely heard that she was dating. She asked, "Robert, what's wrong? I've never seen you so sad." I smiled, an empty smile. My world exploded. Friday was our anniversary. It was supposed to be a romantic evening. She set it up so that her lover took her away from me in front of everyone. I found out that she dated him and partied with him when she had 5 to 7 free days after nights out, 2 to 3 times a year. 13 years I wasted with a whore who loved someone else. Now she says I abused her to accuse me of being a damn whore. She wants to completely destroy me. I will never raise my hands on a woman. I need time to decide what to do, to consult. Sandra was shocked. She came over and hugged me. Robert, I know you would never hit a woman. Ever since you and I broke up, I have despised myself for being weak. You are such an honorable, decent, caring man. No matter what anyone else thinks, I'll be by your side. Here's my number and email. Call me if you need help or just want someone to talk to. There are many other women you've been so kind to, and they will never believe the lies of this slut. I was just getting back to my desk when my boss called me in. He wasn't happy. Yesterday, Carol had shown up at his house with pictures of me abusing her. I was furious. Mr. Douchard, you've known me for years, and you still believe a lying, conniving whore. You can fire me, or I can leave immediately. I'm due 9.5 weeks, so that covers my notice period. When the truth comes out, don't expect me to come back to teach your kids how to do the job. They can screw up this business all they want as far as I'm concerned. I went out, printed out the "I'm quitting" letter, signed it, and stuck it in my internal mail. The looks I got as I left the office showed that many people were surprised that I was capable of such anger. I spent the rest of the morning sorting out what I needed to do. I learned from the financial records that over the past 18 months, Carol had stayed several times at a hotel 3 hours away from home. This was happening when she was visiting her lying-ass sister. It must be genetic. I packed my suitcase and hit the road. I have to say the car was a pleasure to drive. Perhaps the fact that Carol was so annoyed that I didn't give it to her made it even more enjoyable. I pulled into the hotel parking lot. I doubted they would give me what I was going to ask for, but what goes around comes around. I threw my bag in my room and went back to the front desk. I asked to get the manager. The receptionist thought there was something wrong with the room, but I assured her that everything was perfect. I just had a request for the manager. The manager came over and I explained what I needed, if that was even possible. He was confident that without a court order they couldn't help me. I was expecting that. I said that the asshole she would be with was playing the same game with a woman from this town, and she was planning with me. The secretary perked up her ears. When the manager left, she spoke softly. I know the couple you want to videotape. They've been here many times. He's an arrogant bastard. I'm an old friend of the woman you mentioned. He stalks her mercilessly, forcing her to sell everything to get his money. I can call the lawyer who represented her for you. She's pretty damn good. Even the sheriff believed her. But thanks to the photos he presented, he won. She'll get you a court order. I nodded. Thanks. I'm glad to help your friend. If she had just walked away with a prenup, I probably wouldn't have done anything. But they want to ruin my life. They picked the wrong person to mess with. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in my office talking to a woman, Heather Morrison, who was very feisty and didn't fail to let out a few swear words as I explained my situation and what I had managed to find out. When I had finished, she stated emphatically, "Do you have that information at hand?" I nodded. I have it on my phone and on my camera as soon as I came across it. It's more organized and easy to track on my laptop at the hotel. She looked very pleased. If you can be here tomorrow morning at 7:30, we can go over everything and head to the courthouse for the opening at 8:30. I think I can convince the sheriff to give us a warrant for the videotapes at the hotel. I nodded hopefully. From what I've seen, he usually uses this group of hotels. There were 3 other women there that he screwed with this scam. I don't know how much Carol knows, how involved she is, but I'm going to fight her as hard as I can. I'm going to have to get a lawyer in my town. Heather smiled. I'll be your lawyer if you want. That asshole is going to shit his pants when he sees me. He'll know he's in for something bad, damn bad. I told him I'd get to the truth and ruin his life. He knew I meant it. I will. I laughed for the first time since Friday night. I believed her. I hadn't lost faith in others like I had thought I had before. When I walked into the office the next morning, I was surprised to see another man in the office. Heather had introduced him as Jim. He was the father of the woman, Betsy, whom Benning had screwed. He was also the private investigator who was supposed to find the other pieces of the puzzle. I gave Heather an SD card with all the information on it. I highlighted the documents pertaining to Betsy. Jim leaned back in his chair and let out a breathless gasp. He said firmly, "I knew the best thing to do was to make that bastard disappear. I had to do it. The world would be a better place without him." Heather and I headed for the courthouse. Jim was taking on the task of tracking down the other 3 women Benning had screwed. Heather would go after Samantha Wiseman, the woman who, according to these documents, had the ultimate proof of my innocence, and the innocence of all the victims. The question was she involved or just duped by it? At the courthouse office, Heather simply spoke to the female clerk about the reason for her presence. "I thought we were supposed to meet with the sheriff." Heather went into detail, which struck me as odd. Shouldn't she have been talking to the sheriff about it, not the clerk? After about 15 minutes, a gentleman sitting in the back of the office came over and spoke. "Janine, call Betsy and tell her not to pay another penny to that bastard or sell her house. I'll work the court in her favor. Heather, here's your warrant. It covers all the hotels in the group. You can tell Marvin that if he stalls, I'll put him in jail." He walked away. I was shocked. Heather laughed at my expression. "Sheriff Griffiths is a wise old man. He believes that truth is above the law. Let's go to the hotel and fix Marvin." Marvin, the manager, wanted to talk to his superiors, but Heather scared him so badly that he relented. The head of security was called in and served him with a warrant. I may be meticulous, but I had every date Carol had left for her sister during our time together. We watched him punch in dates and names. They were registered as Mr. and Mrs. Benning. Soon we had a video of them together, eating a meal and entering their room. We found another 26 reservations at different hotels in the group, but we couldn't find any recordings from more than 18 months ago. Heather was very pleased. I made a remark about one particular video that she liked. She made some notes and the manager said he would process and deliver all the documentation and videos to her. Heather and I went to her office. She began, "Robert, I've thought this through. We need them to start divorce proceedings. If you sue her for adultery, they'll come back with charges and use these pictures. They will talk after us, so we won't have as much of a chance to catch their lies. You told her you were going on vacation. Take that time. Have them file the paperwork. They'll have to cite their evidence, which we'll destroy. Jim will trace the other women's stories. We know Betsy's story. I'll use the video of you talking to destroy this other bitch for you. I will track down this Samantha and find out her role. I'll have my staff work through all the information and financial issues." I nodded. I need a break. I don't know how to feel, but I want to break it so badly. I'll be gone for a few weeks, but then I need to find a job if someone will hire a wife beater, even if the accusation is false. I'm not a star soccer player. Truth be told, discovering that the bastard was cheating on those women helped me. I wasn't alone in my damn gullibility, but finding the proof helped both them and myself. I didn't feel so worthless. I didn't feel much at all except sadness and fatigue. And of course, bloody furious anger whenever I remembered that night. I stayed here for a few more nights before moving on. While I was in Hamilton, I drove down south to Staffordshire to ride roller coasters. They are definitely a stress reliever. Once back, I headed north to explore the area north of Inverness. I rode the North Coast 500 and moved to the northeast where I rode the Grampian 250. I took the Glenlivet Smugglers Tour and enjoyed a modern Glenlivet or two in one of the boutique shops deep in the hills. Despite living close to both ranges, I had never been there before. The scenery was breathtaking, so I ignored the bastards. I was enjoying exploring, but some part of me was still deeply hurt, and the feeling wouldn't leave me. The rental car was coming to an end, and I headed home. Pulling up in my driveway, I was surprised. The lawn and garden were well maintained. I expected to see a savanna. My neighbor Gordon came out when he saw me. He smiled. The wanderer returns. How's it going? I laughed. As good as can be. Is it your fault? He laughed. A lady, Sandra, called looking for you. She was worried about you. She told me a little about your problem. I was shocked. I never thought Carol was capable of such a thing. She should have been an actress. Together with Sandra, a few other women and me, you've tidied up your garden. I'm not sure everything survived. Some officials have been coming to see you in recent days. Don't be surprised if they knock on your door. I thanked him. I have some shopping to do. When I get back, drop by my place for a couple beers. I shook my head. After I left for a few weeks, I called Sandra. Since then, we had talked a few times a week, but she never mentioned it. She made me talk about my feelings and listened quietly when I cried. I really need to do something to thank her. Gordon and I were chatting on the patio when the doorbell rang. I stepped out, and a court messenger handed me the divorce papers. He smirked. I smiled and told him, I hope the sheriff hates liars in his court. I called Heather, who asked me to scan the documents and email them to her. She would do all the legal responses. She was very pleased, but would not educate me. When I asked, she said, the less you know, the less you can inadvertently tell others. 7 weeks later, I was waiting for Heather in court for her divorce hearing. Jim was with her. He looked so happy. He just hugged me. As I entered the courthouse, I sat next to Heather and Jim. Behind me sat Sandra, Josie, Michaela, Gordon, Bill, and a few other friends who wouldn't take a step away from me. My brother Dan called me several times and was supportive. He couldn't make it because of work. He had a falling out with our parents because they believed Carol over me. I wasn't surprised to see her coworkers, Stephanie and Amy, behind her. Benning was standing next to Carol and grinning like an absolute asshole. He lost his composure when Heather and Jim walked in. I'm sure Jim had a plan for him if the court didn't deal with him. My parents were there too, for her. I ignored their stares. I ignored Carol when she looked in my direction. Bill called her a powerfully dressed slut. His comment was not quiet. I imagined the looks he would get from her and Stephanie. He really liked to wind up haughty Steph. Carol's attorney, one Miss Johnston, started the trial. She looked very confident. My client wishes to enter into a prenuptial agreement that will limit her to only 10% of the value of their joint assets. She admits that she has committed adultery, but only after having endured mistreatment for almost her entire life in her marriage to Robert Benson. She wants a divorce granted on the grounds of spousal abuse and the property divided by court order. She argues that the judgment should be entered generally in her favor. These documents show the assets of the marriage at the time of their divorce. She handed a copy to Heather and also to the court clerk, who gave it to the sheriff. Heather could hardly keep from laughing. The sheriff looked surprised that they had to exchange documents. Heather stood up. My lord, because of Carol Benson's actions, there could be no mediation until today. I am sure you will understand why when the evidence is presented. Miss Johnston and I had a brief discussion regarding the evidence to be presented. She would like, with the court's permission, to bring all the evidence against Mr. Benson before I re-examine the witnesses. I agree to that provided I have an oath from the court that I can re-examine the witnesses. Without that, I will question them as they arise. The sheriff pondered for a few minutes. This is very unusual. I can understand Miss Johnston's desire to cover your client's actions in their entirety. I will agree and allow you to cross-examine the witnesses after Miss Johnston finishes her questioning. Heather resumed her opening statement. My client wishes to have the prenuptial agreement enforced in full and to be considered for a reduction in the plaintiff's payment because of her deliberate lies, which, in addition to attempting to evade responsibility for her adulterous behavior, were intended to destroy his reputation, his character, and his future. She planned her deception with the intent to ruin an honest, decent, caring man quite unlike her and her cohabitant, a pair of conniving, lying charlatans. We are collecting child support from Carol Benson because Mr. Benson lost his job because of these lies. These lies cost him many friendships as well as his relationship with his parents, who were very close. There was no spousal abuse, and we will prove it. Heather sat up. She was smiling. She was going to do this. Carol took the stand. I felt her eyes following me, but I looked ahead, never at her. Carol's attorney told her about how we met, the early days of our marriage, and how I had become violent. Carol explained, choking back tears. Robert didn't like me working nights. I'm sure he thought I was having fun with one of the doctors. Every night his anger built up until he started punching me in the face. I used makeup to cover it up while I was at work. I would go to my sister's house to let the bruises dissolve before going back to work for the day shift. He was fine until the next shift, and the circle would start again. My sister kept urging me to leave him. She took pictures because she said I would need them in the divorce. Her lawyer asked, "Were you having an affair?" Carol would have won the Academy Award for Best Actress any year. She snorted. I'm ashamed to admit that I was. I knew Bruce from back when he was a junior doctor at the hospital. I ran into him outside my sister's house one day. He saw the bruises. He was so kind and supportive. I found that I had deep feelings for him. We made love several times. He helped me feel whole, not a broken woman being bullied. The lawyer walked her through every meeting with Benning, right up to our anniversary dinner and its outcome. She wanted her wedding ring back. I threatened to rip off her finger if she didn't give it back to me, and to smash Bruce's delicate surgeon's hands to pieces. My rage made her afraid I would do this because of my earlier cruelty. I kept the jewelry I had given her, but she only wanted the engagement ring. Carol was beyond outraged as she described how she found her clothes in a bucket when she returned to our room to get her things. She burst into tears as she described her beautiful wedding dress in ashes. Her lawyer sat with a triumphant grin on his face. Her sister Carrie spoke next, followed by Stephanie, and then Benning. All of them gave compelling evidence of my bad behavior, though none of them were witnesses, only the result. Carrie confirmed that she had taken the pictures, much to Heather's delight. By the end of Benning's presentation, it was late evening, and the judge called a recess until the next day. As I was leaving the court, Sandra came up to me and said in a loud voice, "I have never heard such a disgusting lie before." She hugged me, as did the others. My parents just stared daggers at me. They had made their choice. The next morning, Heather asked Carol to appear in court. Heather was all business, no smiles, every question was like a dart. Miss Reese, Carol's maiden name, you stated that after your beloved husband bruised you, you met Bruce Benning, whom you met while he was interning at your hospital. Was he so favorable to you that he charmed the married you? Is this story true? Carol blushed. Yes. Heather pressed play, and the conversation Carol and I had earlier that evening played. You've been the best husband anyone could wish for. I will dance only with you. And when we get to the hotel room? Heather smiled. Are those the words of an abused wife? Carol replied, I tried to show that I cared, but his bullying made me hate him. Heather continued, on your 10th wedding anniversary, you dressed for your lover, but you also professed your love for your husband. You did everything a loving wife should do in a loving relationship, didn't you? Carol stammered, I tried to please him. Heather pressed the play button. There was no doubt in that action. There was no trying to give me pleasure. Heather continued, unrivaled actress, playing the part of the loving wife, knowing you're about to stab him in the back. Heather was firm. You and your longtime lover decided to humiliate Mr. Benson, whose only fault was that he loved a whore. Heather pressed another button, and you could clearly hear Carol speak. Robert, the man I danced with is Bruce Benning. He is my first and only love. I gasped as she spoke. Carol continued. He and I dated before I met you. He and I went out a few times a year. He was studying to be a pediatric neurosurgeon, so we couldn't be together. He was happy when I found you. You're such a good person. Honest, decent man. I loved spending time with you, but I always loved Bruce. He's the reason I couldn't have your children. You would have been very hurt when I left you and took them with me. Bruce is now head of the neurosurgery department at the hospital in Leeds. I'm traveling with him. I'm sorry you're in so much pain, but while we were together, I gave myself to you without abandon so that you would never know I loved another. If Bruce hadn't come back for me, I would have been happy to be your wife forever. Heather ended with me throwing up. The perfect response to her lie. Several shocked ahs erupted from the gallery. Carol looked startled, but she quickly regained her composure. I tried to smooth things over for him. I lied to him so he wouldn't lose face. Heather pressed another button, and Carol appeared outside our house. Heather only smiled. Fortunately, your husband keeps excellent records. We have those dates. So, you were at your sister's house in Covington from May 9th, 14, 2019, December 26th, 31, 2018, August 16th, 22, 2018, March 9th, 14, 2018, and numerous other days before your marriage? Carol replied sharply, yes. Heather pressed another button, and a video of her with Bruce in hotels on those days appeared on the screens. On those dates where there was no video, the reservation form and receipts clearly showed their presence. Heather addressed the judge. They were obtained on a court order from the Hamilton Sheriff's Court. I have attached it to the documents and records I gave to your secretary and Miss Johnston. Heather turned to Carol, who was in white. Amazing, isn't it? Not a single bruise mark. It's as if the bruises never happened. It seems you, Miss Reese and Mr. Benning, loved those hotels and went there every time you supposedly visited your sister. He didn't save you. You were his brownie. Carol glared angrily at Heather. I tried to hold back a smile. Laughter erupted behind me. Heather became even more menacing as she continued to press Carol. Now let's look at that financial fiction you presented to the court. According to your agreement with Mr. Benson, you were both to contribute a portion of your salary to a joint account. You wanted to maintain your financial independence, but that's not the whole truth, is it? You wanted to hide your income from Mr. Benson so you would have a backup in case you decided to leave him. He was just a tool for you to abuse. You lied for years that you were his wife. You lied for years that you were a general nurse making almost a base salary. The truth is that you were, as he describes you, a whore for Benning. You are far advanced in your profession and earning almost 4 times what you declared to Mr. Benson. You have failed to increase your payments as agreed. You admitted poverty when you wanted a new car and asked Mr. Benson to pay for the lease while you drove it on your clandestine, adulterous adventures with Mr. Benning. You had no moral problems even paying for some of your adventures from your joint account with Mr. Benson. That's why the accounts you provided to the court are a fabrication. Heather pressed another button, and images of Carol's bank statements appeared on the screen. They showed significant savings. The current account showed significant payments from her job, which she hadn't told me about. Poor nurse who didn't want a promotion, and you're actually the 3rd most senior nurse in the hospital. Heather brought up the bonds. How do you explain how they ended up in your name and were found in your safety deposit box? Carol looked around in shock. I could see her reflection on the monitor. I tried to show complete indifference by not looking at her directly. Carol corrected herself. I was looking out for myself after his abuse. Heather continued. These are Miss Reese's confirmed personal details and the value of these bonds on that date. She handed them to the court clerk and Miss Johnston, who was no longer smiling. Heather smiled favorably, but I knew she was about to make a savory move. You want your wedding ring back? After all, it's a family heirloom, and an adulteress wouldn't expect to keep it, would she? Is it for sentimental reasons? To remember a decent man, a loving man, not someone who will cast you aside when you fulfill his needs. Carol stated defiantly, I love that ring. It meant everything to me, especially after he burned my wedding dress. I want it back. Heather pressed another button, and a picture of Mr. Bruce Benning and his fiancée Carol Reese at a hospital appointment 9 months before the end of our acquaintance appeared on the screen. The picture showed an engagement ring. Heather continued. The newspaper describes the evening beautifully. Mr. Benning enjoyed showing off the incredible, one-of-a-kind engagement ring he gave his bride-to-be. She repeated the words in a harsher tone. He gave it to her. It's remarkably similar to the one Mr. Benson mistakenly gave to someone claiming to be his fiancée, isn't it? It was a charade, wasn't it? To convince the hospital that Benning was making a commitment. The hospital administrator said they prefer their surgeons to be married because they feel that by having families here, they're more connected to the community. So it's not about sentimental attachment or even love. It's about the position you crave above all else, a doctor's wife. You need it to complete the blinding of the hospital administration. Heather's next comment shocked Carol. Benning only needs you as long as he wants to stay there. I had to suppress a laugh. I'm sure you've been crying over your wedding dress. Did you plan to wear it when, or rather if Benning marries you? Carol replied, no, but it sounded weak. She was crying and we all knew it. Heather pressed another button and Stephanie's voice came out. She invited him to your wedding. She was hoping he would demand it before she married you. Carol sobbed. Mr. Benson's only mistake was that he only saw you through the love he felt for you. He never saw the real you, the cruel, manipulative bitch. You couldn't just walk away from such an honorable man and suffer the loss, could you? He wouldn't have known about your affairs, your financial deception, your deep betrayal all those years ago. You should have rejoiced at his humiliation and demise. You saw Robert Benson as a gullible fool. You saw him as a part-time laborer until your love was free and rich enough for you. Most obviously, you envied his ability to love, so you both set out to destroy his life after you. Your ultimate cruelty is that you sought to destroy his self-esteem, his manhood, so that he would never trust anyone else with his heart. Even that wasn't enough. You wanted him so corrupted that his reputation would lie in ruins. He wouldn't be able to work. He wouldn't have a decent life. There was never any abuse on Mr. Benson's part. The court may take a different view of the abuse you heaped on him throughout the years you lived with him. You denied him children. You took his money. You took his love for granted. Heather finished. You and your lover plotted to ruin the man who loved you, provided for you, and took care of everything you wanted. Your lover beckoned you to marry him, a serial cheater. I wonder if this position you covet will be available after the trial is over, and if so, how long will it last? Carol looked shocked at what Heather had suggested. Miss Johnston didn't ask any more questions. As her sister and Benning got ready to leave the court, Heather called out to the court officer to stop them. She wasn't done with them yet. Her sister Carrie slowly approached the podium. Heather was succinct. Do you admit that you lied to the court in covering up your sister's adulterous affair with Bruce Benning? The sister began to cry. Yes. Heather asked, did you take the pictures of the alleged injuries? Carrie quietly replied, no. Heather finished. I will inform your church leadership of what a non-Christian you are. Carrie's eyes widened, fear gripping her all at once. Screw you, bitch! Heather called out to Stephanie next. Stephanie stood straight but tense. Heather began quietly. How long have you known about your affair? Stephanie replied, the affair was with Robert. Carol has always belonged to Bruce. Heather smiled. Why would you lie for her? Stephanie froze. I never lied. I repeated what I was told. Heather continued. Have you ever seen the bruises she claims she had? Stephanie replied, no, she was just so upset that I believed her. Despite numerous questions, Stephanie refused to admit she was an unwitting fool and stood by her friend. Heather was surgical. Stephanie had no way to cover up her lie going forward. Finally, Heather asked, do you know how to tell the truth? How many boyfriends do you have? Are you thinking of repeating the same trick with your husband when someone better comes along? Stephanie was shocked. I love my husband. I wouldn't do that. And Heather pressed a button and a video appeared on the screen showing Stephanie and her husband Amy Grant leaving the room and meeting Carol and Bruce. Stephanie crouched on the counter before fainting. Amy yells from the gallery, "You goddamn bitch!" and walks away. I guess Brian and Grant would soon find out what had happened. Heather addressed the sheriff directly. May I ask the court for leniency if I ask another witness to come forward before I cross-examine Bruce Benning? The testimony of this witness will clear things up for the court. The sheriff agreed. As I learned later from Bill, Benning appeared to have had a heart attack when Heather said, Samantha Wiseman. A woman I'd never seen before took her place at the podium. She was the perfect cosmetics commercial. She looked flawless. Heather smiled. Miss Wiseman, what do you do? Samantha replied, I am a creative and work in theater, film, and television. I can create textural effects or use makeup to create an experience for most events. If you think of street artists who use chalk to create huge holes in the road or trains appearing out of walls, I can make you look like them. Heather continued, Do you know Bruce Benning? Samantha cautiously replied, Yes, I met him when I was visiting Bristol. My son Alan was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor, and Mr. Benning operated on him. It was a success. That was 8 years ago. Heather asked, How did Mr. Benning find out about your abilities? Samantha answered clearly. After the surgery, Alan's motor skills were impaired for a while. I had to help him use his arm and hand properly again. I was playing with him using plasticine, sculpting his favorite monsters, when Mr. Benning came in. We talked and he seemed fascinated by it. Heather asked, Did it go no further than that? Samantha replied, Yes, it was closer to Halloween, and he asked if I could dress him up for the party. He wanted to be an abusive spouse since his friends always said he was so uptight, he never heard a joke. His reputation, he said, was undeserved. He wouldn't tolerate a woman saying no to him, let alone showing her superiority over him. It would show them all that they were wrong. I made him for 3 parties that year, and at each one the bruises were a slightly different shade. I've done it 3 more times since then, a few years apart. Heather asked, Besides Mr. Benning, do you know anyone else in this court? Samantha looked around and answered, Carol and Samantha. I did their makeup for some parties in Liverpool last year. They said their husbands would never have hit them, but they wanted to see how their friends would react. Heather pressed another button, and images of Carol and Samantha appeared on the screen. They must have been copies of Samantha, as they showed the whole process. Neither of them had any visible marks before she started. When she was done, I believed her. I hit Carol. She's phenomenally good. I almost jumped with delight when I realized that Carol's pictures were the same ones she'd shown the court. Heather stammered, So all those pictures show the work you did and no real bruises? Samantha replied, When they came in, they were spotless. When they left, they looked battered. Heather asked simply, Did you know what your creations would actually be used for? To discredit and accuse their husbands of assault, and for Benning to sue the women who rejected his advances? Samantha was shocked. No, I would never do anything like that. If I had known, I would have contacted them and offered to tell the truth for them. Heather replied, Thank you. Miss Johnston had no questions. She looked shocked and defeated. The sheriff hummed as if to let her know that he was glad to have the case closed, but Heather wanted her piece of flesh. As Benning was testifying, 2 men entered the court. They looked solely at him. Benning didn't look happy at all. I stared at him. I wanted to watch Heather grill and dissect him. My cruel smile, I had practiced for this moment, showed how much I was looking forward to it. Heather began. Mr. Benning, you had an adulterous affair with Miss Reese before she married Mr. Benson, didn't you? The haughty Benning replied, No, I only came to her rescue. Heather picked apart all his lies, and his arrogance made me shudder. He loved only himself. At every opportunity, he tried to show off his accomplishments. When Heather's noose, figuratively speaking, slipped around his neck, it opened the trapdoor. Heather smiled. So, yesterday you claimed to have become intimate with Miss Reese only recently, after her husband assaulted her. But today, I showed the court decades of evidence of you spending time together in all those hotels. Meetings that lasted for days. She laughed at your attempts to make love to her? Benning angrily said, No, we only recently became intimate. Heather continued, Many of those hotel people complained about the noise from your room, your moose screams as you shared intimate moments. Are your hotel neighbors lying? Benning stared at Heather as she listed the many complaints. Heather smiled as she continued, There are more complaints about your behavior. Heather began to wrap up. You lie to cover up your affair with a married woman. You lie to your employers, claiming that everything we just saw is fiction. Are you really a surgeon, or is this another fraud? Benning got angry. I am a surgeon, one of the best. Heather laughed. You may be a talented surgeon, but as a human being, you are despicable. Heather pressed a button and started scrolling through pictures of Benning's marital bad attitude. She stopped and let people read the accompanying letters, which showed how he had tricked 4 courts into granting him substantial monetary settlements against women, such as Betsy, with whom he had befriended. Court records show they all denied assaulting him. From his own records, it appears that he devised his plans in retaliation for them having the audacity to reject his advances. It was through these photos that he had convinced the sheriff, despite all other evidence, that the women had not assaulted him. Heather questioned him about the photos. He couldn't answer some of the incriminating statements. She ripped the covers off of him as she recounted his mistreatment of these women. Your colleagues were right about you, weren't they? You cannot see a woman as an equal capable of refusing your pathetic advances. Those who refused and had property, you persecuted. You lied in court. You are simply a small man in every sense of the word. His angry response didn't go unnoticed by the sheriff, and Heather nearly laughed when he called her a bloody witch. His arrogance was fading away. The realization of what awaited him was slowly coming. After tearing him to shreds over women, she moved on to the main course. Heather showed records of meetings between him and Carol, their written and email correspondence. He denied that they had been communicating during the time Heather was talking about. When she showed the detailed plan to charge me with assaulting Carol, a few sobs erupted from the galley. Benning had a detailed plan of how they were going to ruin me and ruin my life. Benning tried to brush it off, saying that it was just lovers' tales, a distraction, and they would never do that. Heather explained, That was exactly what you were doing. You played his parents. You played his employer. You tricked Miss Johnston into presenting it to this particular court. She continued, producing more documents. She turned to Benning. You weren't going to stop there, were you? You were already plotting another scam to get the money, weren't you? Benning denied it, but looked increasingly concerned. He looked at the 2 men and Carol. Heather paused as one does before proceeding to dessert. Heather pressed a few more buttons. A loud sigh came from the audience. It sounded like it was Carol when the screen popped up with his plan to sue her for all her money when he got sick of her. I heard someone like her sobbing. On the screen was Benning's plan to marry Carol to solidify his position as chief neurosurgeon. In 3 or 4 years, he would learn new techniques that would allow him to move to the United States, where he would make millions. Carol will be discarded as he is fed up with her. He will make sure she commits adultery, and then he will get everything. I could clearly hear Carol sobbing as her dream was shattered. Her reputation would never be restored. Heather led on. You lied in this court, lied in other courts to get a financial reward. I think you will find that the courts will not be merciful to you. Sheriff Griffiths in Hamilton has issued a warrant for your arrest. These officers are here to execute it. On behalf of your victims, I obtained a court order freezing all of your assets, which was executed this morning. I'm sure Miss Reese now understands the difference between what she so easily threw away and a con man who seeks to defraud gullible women by any means necessary to compensate for his inferiority. The officers led the shocked Benning away. Heather then called me to testify. Heather told me about my marriage and how I was completely blindsided. She went into detail about the earlier evening. I admitted to emptying my bladder because of him after throwing it in the trash. I explained my devastation and shock at what had happened. This was compounded by the fact that they had told others that I was an abuser. Because of their lies, I had lost my parents, my job, and many friends. I was still unemployed as no one wanted me, even though it was recognized that I was a damn good engineer. I had lost everything I held dear. The sheriff said he would make a decision on the division of property the next day and ended with, "Mr. Benson, you have been fully vindicated and have avoided a gross miscarriage of justice. You are the decent, honest, caring person your attorney spoke of in the beginning. You deserve to find someone like you and build a good future." He finished curtly, "Those who lied, I'll deal with tomorrow in my courtroom." Jim hugged Heather. He hugged me. Bill, Sandra, and the others hugged me. I saw my mother crying. She had lost her daughter and her son. After what Dan had said, her visits to her grandchildren had noticeably decreased. The next day, the sheriff dissolved the marriage and awarded me my share according to the prenuptial agreement. He also ordered her to pay the amount she was required to contribute to the joint account and the payments she made for her adulterous relationship from the joint account. The value of her automobile, which she could well afford. The bonds were worth £125,000, so he awarded me £112,500 of that. He awarded her maintenance of £675 a month until I found a job with a salary comparable to what I had lost because of her lies. Heather's staff added all the figures, and they were in the documents she gave to the court. Carol looked like her old self. It was unlikely that even Samantha could hide the fact that she had spent a lot of time crying. The sheriff had explicitly told Carol that he was seriously considering putting her in jail for lying in his court. If she won, and the truth came out later, she would be jailed for at least a few years. He fined her £5,000 and gave her a 3-month suspended prison sentence. He also ordered her to pay my legal costs in full within a month or the suspended sentence would be enforced. Carrie and Samantha were fined £1,000 each to be paid within 30 days. Benning appeared before the Hamilton Sheriff Court and explained his reasons to Sheriff Griffiths. Afterward, over a cup of coffee, Heather, Jim, and I discussed what to do next. Heather was going to go to the General Medical Council and try to get Benning removed from the medical registry. While we were talking, Jim got a call from Hamilton Court. Benning had been taken into custody. Sheriff Griffiths made it clear to his defense that the next time he appears in court, he wants all the money he stole from those 4 women to be deposited into the court account, or he could face a lengthy prison sentence. In addition, he can expect full payment of the court fees and any other justifiable expenses they incurred because of his false claims against those women. Even with those payments, he was facing a solid prison sentence. Heather was also going to appeal to the General Board of Nursing, as Carol's behavior in such a high position was simply despicable. She realized that she would probably fail since, unlike Benning, she had not abused her position, but it would make employers look twice at her with this complaint in hand. And I would be looking for a job as I wanted nothing to do with Carol. Heather advised me to put up with the child support until I found a job. Jim startled me when he quietly said, "Stay with Sandra for a while. Somehow she seems to like you. Whenever I talk to her, she seems nice and caring. Maybe you can help each other, since she said she can't be what you want, whatever that means. I'll say this once. With what you've been through, see a counselor. Despite your cheerful outlook, you are in a lot of pain. You're not fooling us. A counselor will help you find yourself, live life, find happiness. You deserve that." Heather and I have seen so much over the years, but there are books and movies to be written about your story. You're that good, decent, honorable man. Help me get him back. And screw them up even more by making a damn good life for them. As we parted, Heather's last words made me laugh. If you think the sheriff let her off lightly without putting her in jail, he didn't. My bill would be about £24,000. Your rate would be much lower, for you have been so helpful to Betsy, but she will never know it. Dan stopped by to see me after work. He was very happy for me. He looked tired since the new baby hadn't slept much. They had decided to have a third since he wanted a son. And so he was born. Our parents hadn't seen him yet. He offered me a job on the night shift. I refused. I had little experience in this field. He put his arm around me and said, "You will find the right person. You'll have the family you want, at least until the first toxic diaper." He laughed as he walked away. Sandra, Josie, Michaela, Gordon, Bill, and a few others came over later to have a celebratory drink with me. It was so much fun to have fun. Josie surprised me by asking me to dance. She smiled, pulling me closer. "Take a chance, Sandra. She has always felt affection for you. You'll be a good fit for each other. And if not, Michaela or I will snag you." She laughed, pretending to waddle away as if I had stepped on her foot. Sandra was the last to leave. "Robert, I said that if you needed anything, I would help you. I still mean it. I wish I was the woman you needed then." Michaela, Josie, and the others would have been willing to be very good friends with you or more. You are too good a man to be alone. I've seen the way you acted when others brought their children to work. You're going to be a great father. Do whatever you need to do to find that love. Sandra, I think we can help each other. I was too young, didn't know myself or women's ways to help you. You were very dear to me. You were my first love, not a crush. Jim said I should see a counselor to help me find myself. Maybe we'll both go to a counselor and see what happens if he can help us both. I have a void. I don't know who I am. Sandra smiled. Robert, if we do this, it's only because I want to be with you as a partner, as a mother in the future. You deserve that. She sighed. Let's try to see a counselor. 2 days later, the local newspaper came out, and I was on the front page. The article was very detailed and explained how they were trying to set me up. No one was left in any doubt that I was a good guy. No one in the comments section of the online publication supported her. Some of the comments about what was going to happen to her scared me. About 8 weeks later, I received an email from Heather with copies of her letters to the General Medical Council, the General Board of Nursing, and the hierarchy of Carey Evangelical Church. Heather did not ignore Benning and how his actions contributed to the disgrace of his profession, and how his actions led to the disgrace of that profession. She detailed his public disclosures, his lying in court. She demanded that his registration be suspended immediately. It helped that at his third court hearing, despite paying back the money he had defrauded these women of, over £250,000, Sheriff Griffiths jailed him for 5 years. Heather gave Samantha Wiseman's photographs of him and her testimony to the fiscal prosecutor, who made sure his defense got copies before they even left court on the first day of his plea. Benning pleaded guilty at the first opportunity, so he was entitled to a 33% discount on his sentence. Sheriff Griffiths cited a previous decision, affirmed in the Court of Appeal, that although he was limited to a 5-year term because he believed the High Court would have jailed Benning for 7.5 years, with the discount he could impose that term. He had considered sending Benning to the High Court because a stricter sentence could be imposed there, which he thought was highly likely. However, given the backlog due to COVID, he decided that was best. In other words, appeal at your own risk. Benning, as a senior medical consultant, was on the record, and several national newspapers ran the story. The Sunday editions crucified him. I was approached but declined to comment, citing that I was still too far removed from her betrayal to make any statements. Heather's letter to evangelical church leadership questioned Carey's suitability for her position and the possibility of further promotion. She pointed out that Carey had lied under oath by picking up a Bible, how her actions condoned the repeated violation of a commandment this church requires her to keep. Her position in the hierarchy of the evangelical church would be problematic. I doubted her marriage would survive, so zealous was her husband about godliness. At the golf club, I learned that Brian and Stephanie had broken up. Amy and Grant, too. Sarah and Mark were having problems because she was so close to the other three that he now had serious suspicions about her. At least my kicks went 15 yards farther when I thought the ball belonged to one of the Bennings. As for Carol, I didn't give a damn about her. She rolled me to the depths of despair and then found that her knight in rusty armor rolled her even more. Karma's a bitch. Chapter 2. As for Sandra and I, we've been seeing 2 psychologists for over 3 months now. It's been difficult, but we've helped each other. Well, at least she's helped me. Sharon helps Sandra. I accompany her, but usually only stay with her when it comes to reasons. Sandra said her mom wasn't very nice to her, more like really bad. I dated Sarah. Sandra would hug me when I cried. When we discussed my feelings about Carol and our marriage, I was so confused. Sarah brought it out of me. She broke down the wall I had built to control my feelings. I hated her for easing that pain. She uncovered my sense of loss, my longing to understand what I had done wrong. She made me realize that betrayal wasn't the worst part. It was the way she was willing to destroy me that really shattered my world. I didn't know this, Carol. I didn't recognize myself anymore. Sarah told me that I hadn't done anything wrong. I turned my anger on myself as I couldn't find answers. If I could write it all down, see it in black and white like an engineering puzzle, I would realize that 2 conniving bastards had done it. It wasn't my fault. I played no part in what they did. I was the good guy everyone was talking about. Sandra supported Sharon on this issue, and it was because of her that I wrote this article. She was very persuasive, overcoming all my reasons for not doing it. In the end, she said that if I did it, she would reward me. I've reread the whole thing several times, and I can see that it wasn't my fault. None of my friends had any reason to suspect what Carol was doing. To everyone, we had a perfect marriage. We rarely fought. I may have been gullible in believing she loved me, but there was nothing I could do to prevent what they planned and carried out. I'm going to have to work on coming to terms with that. I know I ruined their plans and lives even more than they ruined my life. I called Sandra to tell her I was done. She said she would be in a little while. I don't know what the reward will be. She is a great baker and teased me with her scones. I love scones. We spend a lot of time together, cuddling at the movie theater or at her house, whatever we had physical time for. The conversations we had were great. We have so many common interests, and some of them are just not interesting to each other, but we're glad we do. For example, she doesn't see the point of golf. A good walk ruined is her opinion. In a conversation with Sharon a few weeks ago, Sandra talked about her love for children and now hopes to be able to have some close ones. Sharon, as our last session showed, is helping her, so maybe they have a future together. There was a knock on the door. Opening it, I found Sandra there. She was very nervous. She came in and I offered to take her coat. She looked at me with the strangest expression I had ever seen on her face. She curled her lips like she did in stressful situations and looked terrified. Me? She sighed heavily, shrugged her shoulders, and slowly took off her coat. She looked at me. I've been doing what Sharon said to prepare, but I'm scared. I led her into the living room and sat down next to her. Sandra, you don't have to do this. Robert, I want to. This is the first stage where I hope I can be something more for you. What was I supposed to do? Yes, we got on with it. 2 weeks later, everything changed again. I was in a very happy mood. I got a job with a competitor of Ducharme who paid me more than they did. Neil Davidson seemed like a great guy when he interviewed me. It confirmed everything I had heard about him. He had his own problems, so he was sympathetic to what I was going through. That didn't stop him from checking out my engineering skills very thoroughly. Sandra and I spent most evenings together. Last weekend, for example, I took her on a roller coaster in Staffordshire. It was her first time. She screamed all over the place, but she loved it. I booked a room with twin beds. Sandra came in looking thoughtful. She had 2 sessions with Sharon this week. I picked her up in my arms and danced as I was so happy to have a job and, more importantly, her in my life. I repeated this to her repeatedly as I danced with her. That same day, I proposed marriage to her. We clinked glasses and said, "To the future." She said, "We'll have time to discuss what we want, but is there anything you think we need to think about now?" I looked around. Where are we going to live? You might not want to live here because of his history. I'll live anywhere with you. Sandra laughed. I don't see any reason to move. The new houses are like little rabbit holes. I used to come here with you when you visited your grandparents. You felt their love made this place special. We're going to be alike. There are big rooms, lots of space, and 4 bedrooms. We could add another bathroom. I would change some of the color schemes, but nothing more than that. The garden is big enough for the kids to play safely in. We can think about planting vegetables, herbs, and perhaps fruit. I nodded. What about you? Are you planning the perfect wedding? Sandra looked surprised. I've never dreamed of having a wedding. Any wedding would be small, since I only have my mom, my sister, and her family. I have 4 or 5 really close friends, 2 of whom will pretend to be annoyed that I stole you from them. You have your friends like Bill and Gordon, your brother and his family. You never talk about your parents, and I understand that you felt betrayed by them. I guess I worry that our children won't have grandparents to spoil them. My dad died young, and my mom's health is not the best. She was a wonderful mother. She will be a wonderful grandmother. It will be your decision, and I will support it either way. I said quietly, I'll think about it. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.